January 20th, 1953. A freezing morning in Washington. Two of the most powerful men on earth sit side by side in the back of a black limousine. One of them is about to become president. The other is leaving the White House forever. For 17 minutes they ride in total silence. The air is so thick with pure hatred that aides in the jump seats later swear they could taste it, like a monsoon of rage. 10 years earlier these same two men were friends, close enough that one offered to step aside and be vice president for the other. Now they cannot even look at each other. And for the next 8 years, 8 long years, one of them will refuse to set foot inside the White House ever again. Not for a state dinner. Not for a funeral. Not even for 5 minutes. This is the true story of how Harry S. Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower went from brothers-in-arms to bitter enemies. And how one 74-word paragraph that was deleted from a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, destroyed everything. Hit that subscribe button right now, because by the end of this series you will never look at American presidents the same way again. This is not a history lesson. This is a betrayal. June 1945. Europe is finally free. Church bells ring from London to Rome. And one man is on every front page on earth, General Dwight David Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, the man who planned D-Day. Who crushed Hitler, who liberated concentration camps with his own eyes. In Paris, women throw flowers at his open car. In Brussels, grown men weep when he shakes their hand. He is not just a general. He is a living saint in olive drab. The press calls him the liberator of Europe. And back home in America, millions believe he walks on water. Now cut to Washington, D.C. A man who never wanted the job is sitting behind the resolute desk. Harry S. Truman. 61 years old. No college degree. A failed haberdasher from Missouri who once sold men's hats for a living. 3 months earlier he was the anonymous vice president. Then Franklin Roosevelt dropped dead, and overnight the moon, the stars, and all the planets fell on Harry Truman's shoulders. He later told friends, "I felt like the world had ended." He had never met Churchill. He had never met Stalin. He had never commanded so much as a battalion. And now he is deciding whether to drop an atomic bomb that can erase cities. These two men could not be more different. Eisenhower, West Point, ramrod posture, soft-spoken, master of armies. Truman, farmer, county judge, blunt as a sledgehammer, swears like a muleskinner. But Harry Truman is no fool. He knows raw power when he sees it. And Eisenhower has more political power in his little finger than most senators have in a lifetime. Both parties are begging Ike to run for president in 1948. Democrats whisper. Republicans beg. And Eisenhower? He insists he is just a soldier. But Truman decides, "I need this man on my side." July 1945. The two men finally meet face-to-face at the Potsdam Conference outside Berlin. Truman is awestruck. He writes to his wife Bess, "Ike is as fine a man as I have ever met." Over the next 2 years the friendship grows fast and deep. Truman appoints Eisenhower Army Chief of Staff. Awards him his 4th Distinguished Service Medal in a ceremony where both men are grinning like schoolboys. They exchange letters signed "Dear Ike" and "Dear Mr. President." Truman keeps Eisenhower in the loop on every major decision, the atomic bomb, the Berlin airlift planning. The birth of NATO. Then, in July 1947, Truman does something absolutely unthinkable. He sits Eisenhower down and makes him an offer that stuns even the hardest Washington insiders: if General MacArthur runs in '48 as a Republican. I will gladly step aside and be your vice president. Let that sink in. A sitting president of the United States offers to become second fiddle to a general who has never held elected office. Eisenhower is flattered. But he turns it down. He still believes politics is beneath him. 1950, the Korean War explodes. Truman needs the one man the entire world trusts to command NATO. He calls Eisenhower personally. Ike drops everything, moves to Paris, and builds the alliance that still protects Europe today. Their letters during this period are warm, almost brotherly. Truman signs off with kindest personal regards, Harry. Eisenhower replies devotedly, Ike. There is zero hint of the volcanic explosion that is coming, but in 1952 everything changes. Truman is exhausted. Korea is bleeding America dry. His approval rating is in the toilet. He shocks the nation, I will not run again. The Democrats scramble. Republicans smell blood. Their conservative wing wants Senator Robert Taft, an isolationist who hates NATO. The moderate wing wants one man and one man only, Dwight Eisenhower. Massive I Like Ike rallies erupt across America. 40,000 people pack Madison Square Garden just to chant his name. Eisenhower watches a film of the rally in his Paris apartment. And cries. He finally realizes, the American people are begging him to save the country, June 1952. Eisenhower resigns from the army, flies home, and in his tiny hometown of Abilene, Kansas, announces he will run as a Republican. Harry Truman's friend, the man he offered the presidency to on a silver platter, is now running against Truman's party. And the real bloodbath is about to begin. In a few weeks Eisenhower will stand on a stage in Wisconsin next to the most vicious demagogue in American politics. And he will make a decision that Harry Truman will never, ever forgive. A decision that will delete 74 words from a speech. And delete an entire friendship forever. Click the next video right now, because what Eisenhower did next is the moment two presidents became mortal enemies. You do not want to miss this. Last episode we saw how Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower went from total strangers to the closest of allies in just 4 years. Truman offered to be Eisenhower's vice president. Eisenhower called Truman Mr. President with genuine affection. But in 1952 Eisenhower decided to run, as a Republican. And now the man Truman once worshipped is running against everything Truman believes in. Today, we reach the point of no return. One night in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Eisenhower will commit an act that Truman will describe as the lowest, most disgusting thing he has ever seen a man do for votes. Buckle up. This one hurts. October 1952. The presidential campaign is turning vicious. Republicans are screaming that Truman is soft on communism. They blame him for losing China. They say Korea is Truman's war. And riding the red-baiting wave is the junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, the most dangerous demagogue America has ever produced. McCarthy doesn't accuse. He smears. He waves fake lists of communists in the State Department. He destroys lives with a smirk. And one of his favorite targets is the greatest statesman America ever produced, General George Catlett Marshall. You know Marshall, the man who won World War II while Eisenhower commanded in the field. The man who gave Eisenhower command in Europe over 200 more senior generals. The man who sacrificed his own dream of leading D-Day so Eisenhower could have the glory. McCarthy calls Marshall a liar steeped in falsehood. He accuses him of treason in China. He spits on the Marshall Plan that saved Europe from Stalin. And Eisenhower? Eisenhower owes Marshall everything. October 1952. Eisenhower is scheduled to give a major speech in Milwaukee, McCarthy's home state. He writes a blazing 74-word defense of George Marshall. He plans to read it with McCarthy sitting right next to him on stage. It is going to be the loudest, clearest repudiation of McCarthyism imaginable. Aides leak the text to reporters. The New York Times prepares the headline, then. The day before the speech. Republican governors, senators, and party bosses corner Eisenhower. General, Wisconsin is a must-win state. McCarthy is untouchable here. If you attack him, we lose the election. They beg. They threaten. They say the entire presidential race could be lost over 74 words. Eisenhower, the man who once stared down Hitler, hesitates. He has never run for office. He has no idea how brutal politics really is. Finally, he caves. He deletes the 74 words. He shakes McCarthy's hand on stage. He praises McCarthy's goals. And he says absolutely nothing about George Marshall. The next morning newspapers explode. Eisenhower deletes praise of Marshall to please McCarthy crowd. Election at any cost. Herblock's famous cartoon shows Eisenhower sewing a Nazi swastika onto McCarthy's sleeve. Even Republican editors are disgusted. But the worst reaction comes from one man, Harry S. Truman. Truman worshipped George Marshall. He called him the greatest living American. When he hears what Eisenhower did, something inside Harry Truman snaps forever. He goes nuclear. He hits the campaign trail like a hurricane of rage. In speech after speech he rips Eisenhower to shreds. He calls him a coward. He says Eisenhower sold his soul for votes. He says the man who once commanded armies now cannot even stand up to a drunken bully from Wisconsin. He tells crowds, I never thought the day would come when General Eisenhower would stoop so low. Eisenhower is stunned. He considered Truman a friend. Now the President of the United States is calling him morally blind on national radio. Aides say the mere mention of Truman's name makes Eisenhower's eyes flash with hatred. He tells speechwriters, that man is beneath the dignity of the office. The friendship is dead. An election night 1952 will bury it 6 feet under. November 4, 1952. Eisenhower wins 442 electoral votes, one of the biggest landslides in history. Truman's attacks backfired spectacularly. Americans wanted change, and they wanted Ike. 2 weeks later the two men are forced to meet in the Oval Office for the transition. It is one of the most awkward meetings in presidential history. Truman tries to brief Eisenhower on Korea, on Stalin, on the budget. Eisenhower sits stone-faced. Later he writes in his diary, added little to my knowledge. Did not affect my planning. Translation, waste of time. He refuses Truman's invitation for Christmas lunch. The Cold War between them has officially begun, January 20, 1953. Inauguration Day. Eisenhower will commit one final act of pure contempt that will make Harry Truman swear he will never set foot in the White House again as long as Dwight Eisenhower is president. What he does in the next 17 minutes will shock the nation. And start an 8-year exile that only ends with a funeral. Part 3 is dropping right now. You're not ready for how cold this gets. So far we've watched a beautiful friendship turn to poison in a single night in Wisconsin. Eisenhower sold out George Marshall for votes. Truman called him a coward to his face on national radio. Eisenhower crushed Truman's party in a landslide. Now it is January 20, 1953, Inauguration Day. And the final act of contempt is about to unfold in the back of a limousine. This 17-minute car ride will be so icy that grown men in the Secret Service will never forget it. And it will launch Harry Truman into an 8-year exile from the White House that only ends because another president is assassinated. Let's go, January 20th, 1953. 11:57 a.m. Temperature, 30 degrees and falling. Harry and Bess Truman stand inside the White House waiting to greet the new president. Tradition says the incoming and outgoing presidents have coffee together before the ride to the Capitol. A limousine pulls up. Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower are inside. They refuse to come in. They will not set foot inside the White House until Dwight Eisenhower owns it. Aides beg. Truman's staff are mortified. Finally Harry Truman walks out alone, climbs into the back seat, and sits next to the man who was once his friend. Photographers capture the moment, two forced smiles that don't reach the eyes. 17 minutes to the Capitol. 17 minutes of pure hatred, the only real exchange. Eisenhower asks coldly, "Who ordered my son John home from Korea for the inauguration?" Truman, "I did. A boy should see his father sworn in as president." Eisenhower, "Thank you. That's it." An aide later says the tension was hatred you could bottle. CBS newsman Eric Severide watches the scene and writes, "I have never seen two grown men despise each other more." The oath. The speech. The parade. Then Harry and Bess Truman board a train back to Missouri. Crowds cheer. Truman waves from the back platform. He is going home. And he makes a private vow, "As long as Dwight Eisenhower is president, I will never come back," and he means it. For the next 8 years Harry Truman becomes the only living ex-president in American history to be completely shut out of the White House. No state dinners. No invitations to sign legislation. No consultations when Churchill visits. When Eisenhower hosts NATO leaders Truman once negotiated with, Truman is not invited. The regular warm letters. Gone. In 8 years Eisenhower sends exactly one note, a 2-sentence thank you when Truman returns a borrowed globe. That's it. Total radio silence. Truman notices every slight. He notices when Eisenhower dedicates monuments and his name is not on the list. He notices when Eisenhower flies to Europe and never calls the one man who met Stalin eye to eye. In private letters Truman now calls Eisenhower Alibi Ike, a nickname that cuts deep. He tells Dean Acheson, "That man wouldn't know how to run a drugstore, let alone a country." He says Eisenhower is lazy, plays too much golf, has no backbone. The profanity in those letters would make a sailor blush. July 1957. Truman dedicates his presidential library in Independence. Every living president is expected to attend an ex-president's library dedication. Eisenhower doesn't show. He sends a 2-paragraph telegram read by a low-level bureaucrat. Truman is livid. He writes sarcastically to Acheson, "I hope you were impressed with Ike's personal touch." But inside the Eisenhower White House, Truman's name is poison. Aides know never to mention him. One man finally decides enough is enough, Bryce Harlow, a senior aide who worked for both administrations. In May 1958 he walks into the Oval Office knowing he might be fired on the spot. He tells Eisenhower, "Mr. President, keeping Harry Truman exiled is hurting the office you hold. Invite him back." Eisenhower explodes at first. But Harlow will not back down. Finally Eisenhower agrees to send invitations. 3 invitations in 1958 to 59. Every single one arrives with insultingly short notice, 11 days, then 2 months, then 7 days. Truman smells a trap. He rejects all 3. The Wall Stays Up, October 1959. George Marshall dies. His funeral brings the two enemies together for the first time in nearly 7 years. They sit side by side in the front pew at Fort Myer Chapel. They exchange maybe 10 words. But something shifts. The raw hatred cools, just a little, then November 22, 1963 happens. A young president is murdered in Dallas. And Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower are forced to ride in the same car one more time. To bury John F. Kennedy. What happens in that car will finally end an 8-year war. But the reconciliation is not what you think. Part 4, the final chapter, is the most emotional thing you will watch this year. It's waiting for you right now. For 3 episodes we have watched one of the greatest friendships in American history turn into one of its ugliest feuds. A deleted speech. A 17-minute ride from hell. 8 years of total silence. 3 fake olive branches. Now, November 1963. America is in mourning. President John F. Kennedy has been assassinated. And the funeral procession will force Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower into the same limousine one final time. This time, something breaks. This is the end of the story, November 25, 1963. St. Matthew's Cathedral, Washington. The funeral of John F. Kennedy. Harry Truman, now 79, frail but sharp. Dwight Eisenhower, 73, heart disease already eating him alive. They sit together. They watch Jacqueline Kennedy in her black veil. They watch 3-year-old John salute his father's casket. Something bigger than pride fills the car on the way to Arlington. After the burial, the limousines return to Blair House where Truman is staying. Eisenhower does something he refused to do on Inauguration Day 1953, he gets out of the car. He walks inside. He accepts Truman's invitation for coffee and sandwiches. For over an hour the two old warriors talk. No aides. No press. They talk about Kennedy. About Vietnam looming. About getting old. About everything except the wound. Photographers catch them leaving, shoulders relaxed, faces softer than they have been in a decade. Headlines scream, feud over, Truman and Eisenhower reconcile over coffee. But it is not the full Hollywood ending. They exchange a few letters after that day. They appear together at a couple of events. But the warmth of 1945 never returns. They never become friends again. They simply stop being enemies. March 28, 1969. Dwight Eisenhower dies at Walter Reed Hospital. Harry Truman, now 84 and in failing health, does not attend the funeral. He sends condolences to Mamie, but stays in Independence, December 26, 1972, the day after Christmas. Harry Truman dies at age 88. He outlives Eisenhower by almost 4 years. In his final interviews he never apologizes for the 1952 attacks. He still believes Eisenhower betrayed George Marshall. He still believes he was right, so why does this story still matter? Because it proves even the greatest leaders are human. They nurse grudges. They let pride blind them. They choose politics over decency. Eisenhower won the presidency. But he lost a friend who could have helped him govern. Truman defended principle. But he cut himself off from the country he loved for 8 bitter years. Eisenhower's own aides called the Milwaukee speech that terrible day. He regretted it until he died. He never apologized publicly to Marshall's widow. He never fully explained himself to Truman. He just lived with it, and Truman. He finally returned to the White House in 1961, not because Eisenhower invited him, but because a young president named John Kennedy understood something Eisenhower never did: history is bigger than hurt feelings. On January 21, 1961, one day after his own inauguration, Kennedy made Harry Truman his very first official guest. Truman walked back into the Oval Office after 8 years in exile. He stood behind the resolute desk and tears came to his eyes. Kennedy asked question after question. Truman answered every one. Later that night he sat at the White House piano and played Mozart for the new first couple. He was home, the lesson. The presidency is bigger than any one man. But it is not bigger than the men who hold it. They laugh. They cry. They forgive. Or they don't. Truman and Eisenhower remind us that even giants can act small. And sometimes the only thing that heals a decade of hate is a cup of coffee, 2 old men, and the shared grief of burying a young president cut down too soon. That is the real end of the story. Not triumph. Not full forgiveness. Just 2 human beings deciding the war is finally over. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you cry, if it made you think, do 3 things right now. Smash that like button, it tells YouTube to show this to more people. Subscribe and hit the bell. We tell the stories textbooks leave out. Comment below, which moment shocked you the most, the deleted 74 words, the 17-minute ride, or the coffee at Blair House. I read every single comment. Thank you for watching the entire series. This one was personal. See you in the next forgotten chapter of history.